here on this wonderful night, right? It's cooler and it's rain. It maybe doesn't seem so nice, but it is nice. God is blessing us. I want to do a song that I don't know that I had to print the words because I don't think I've ever done it here, but I think at least some of you know it. If two of you know it, that's 50% of the crowd, right? So this goes along with what he's preaching about tonight, the verses that he's preaching about. Teach me, Lord, to wait. This is my mom's favorite verse. I think her favorite song, too. Teach me, Lord, to wait down on my knees till in your own good time you answer my pleas. Teach me not to rely on what others do, but to wait in prayer for an answer from you. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not grow weary. They shall walk and not faint. Lord, teach me, Lord, to wait. Teach me, Lord, to wait. While hearts are aflame, let me humble my pride and call on your name. Keep my faith renewed, my eyes on thee. Let me be on this earth what you want me to be. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not grow weary. They shall walk and not faint. Teach me, Lord, to wait.
Thank you, Tim and Mildred. I'm impressed you found a song to go with that passage. We're looking at the 40th chapter of Isaiah, a very familiar passage when we get to it, Isaiah chapter 40. In Judges 22, okay, we'll try it again. All right, I got to start all over. I'm sorry. In the 22nd chapter of Judges, we learn that Samson lost his superhuman strength. But he prayed, asking God to restore it just one more time. In Judges 22:28, please, God, strengthen me just once more. Some of us may feel like we need to pray a similar prayer because we've been perhaps battling a loss of strength for the last 6 months. You realize it's been 6 months since the middle of March, and we've been dealing with COVID-19, and if that weren't enough, then a couple of other things as well. And like Samson, we may feel like we've lost our strength. For the last 2 weeks, we've been looking at some of the promises of God The first promise that we examined was the promise of His presence. And last week, second, the promise of His protection. Today, we're going to look at the promise of His strength. And it's found in a very familiar passage. This is Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles, and they will run and not grow weary, and they will walk and not faint. Promise of strength. That's probably a good one for us as a people and as a nation to claim here tonight. I'd like for us to look a little closer at it, though. And when you look at any passage, it's always helpful to put it in its historical context. And in this case, the book of Isaiah was written to the southern kingdom, sometimes called Judah. Their capital city, of course, was Jerusalem. And the occasion for writing this book was just after the northern kingdom had been destroyed. Historically, in 722, the northern kingdom had been defeated by the Assyrians, who were the world power at that time, and then they exiled most of the population as slaves to Assyria. Now Isaiah comes on the scene and prophesies to the southern kingdom, the only kingdom of Israel that's still left. And so his book begins in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 1, like this. The vision of Isaiah, the son of Amos, which was concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of, and these are kings, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Now, mentioning those kings are helpful because we can pretty well pinpoint his ministry. And historians think that it was primarily from 740 BC to 681 BC. So a little over 60 years that he prophesied. Actually, yeah, about 61 years. So this is when he began his letter to the southern kingdom. And his purpose was to warn them. About what? That what had just happened to the northern kingdom would eventually happen to the southern kingdom. And he says as much in verse 7. As a prophecy, he says, our country, speaking of the southern kingdom because that's where Isaiah was, our country is desolate. Your cities are burned with fire. Your land, strangers devour in its presence. And it is desolate as overthrown by strangers. He is predicting the fall of the southern kingdom to the Babylonians. Now, what is interesting about this is that Isaiah wrote this about 95 years before it actually happened. The fall of the southern kingdom to the Babylonians was in 587 BC, some 94 or 95 years after Isaiah prophesied that this was going to happen. So it was a long-term warning. You would think that it would be a wake-up call for the southern kingdom, but unfortunately it was not. They did not heed his warning, and they wound up being overrun by the Babylonians, who had defeated the Assyrians by that time. And then they too, for the most part, were carried off into slavery back to Babylon. Now, interestingly, Jeremiah would come along many, many years after this, and he would predict how long the Babylonians would enslave the Israelites. And so in Jeremiah chapter 25 at verse 11, the prophet Jeremiah says, this whole country will become a desolate wasteland, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. 70 years. And so Isaiah warned them, but they didn't heed the warning. But he did predict why they would fall to the Babylonians. The same reason the northern kingdom had fell to the Assyrians. They rebelled against God. And we read that in chapter 1, this time verses 2 and 3. Isaiah says, "Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. I have nourished and brought up children, and they have rebelled against me." Verse 3, "The ox knows his owner, and the donkey his master's crib, but Israel does not know, and my people do not consider." So on the heels of the northern kingdom's destruction, Isaiah predicted the southern kingdom's destruction, and we know historically that about 94 or 95 years after his prediction, that is exactly what happened. And that they were held in Babylonian captivity for 70 years, and then they were allowed to return. That sets the stage for the verse that we're going to look at here tonight, chapter 40. Because in that chapter, Isaiah is assuming, in his mind's eye, some 170 years in the future, he is assuming that God is going to allow the nation of Israel to return. But because they had been enslaved for 70 years, they would have lost their strength, they would have lost their vigor, they would have lost in many ways their will to live, and they needed God's strength. And the passage we're looking at here tonight is a promise of that strength. The reason I chose this particular promise of God is because maybe we need some of God's divine strength as well. For different reasons. We haven't been overrun by a foreign nation, but we definitely have been overrun by COVID-19. And it would be well for us to consider how we might take advantage of God's strength as well. With that in mind, I want us to notice three things about this passage. And we're not going to just look at verse 31. We're going to go back to verse 27 and then move forward to verse 31. Three things. First, I want us to see the weakness. The weakness. As I mentioned, Isaiah is predicting that after their captivity of 70 years, they would be allowed to return, the southern kingdom, but their bodies would be emaciated, their strength would be drained, and they would need divine help. They would need God's help just to get back to the promised land. And so he predicts that they will be in need of strength because of their weakness. Now, he mentions their weakness in two different ways. First, he says that they will be physically weak in verse 30. Now, again, we're in Isaiah chapter 40, this time verse 30. Isaiah says, "Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall." Well, if that's the case for young people, and if that's the case for young men, then where does that leave everybody else? Where does that leave somebody my age? In probably dire straits as far as personal strength is concerned. So he is predicting that they will be physically weak. But he also tells us that they will be spiritually weak as well. In verse 27 he writes, "Why do you complain, Jacob? Why do you say, Israel?" And what are they saying? Here's what they were saying. "My way is hidden from the Lord. My cause is disregarded by my God." After being in captivity for 70 years, they would have reached the conclusion that God did not care about them, that God had forgotten them, that God had abandoned them. And Isaiah wanted to address that complaint, and he wanted to show them that it was indeed a false complaint, because in verses 28 and 29, he answers this complaint. "Do you not know," he's writing to those who think God had abandoned them, "do you not know, have you not heard, the Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak." Isaiah, concerning their spiritual weakness, says God is not weak. In essence, he's telling them he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. That the one who created the universe and put the world into place had not forgotten them. And this same God would come and not only rescue them from captivity, but give them the strength to carry on. So first, I want us to see their weakness. And maybe our own weakness. Maybe our own weakness. Maybe we're tired of what we're going through and have been through for these next 6 months. And then we just heard recently that one of the vaccines that we hoped might soon come on the market has now been put on hold because they have found one person in Great Britain who has had an adverse reaction. And that in itself is bad news and makes us perhaps wonder, well, how much longer is this going to go on? I hope that we haven't followed the illogical conclusion that the Southern Kingdom arrived at. They said, well, this must mean that God just doesn't care. God has abandoned us. God's forgotten us. No, God hadn't forgotten us. But we can see ourselves in Israel's weakness. We can see our own. Second, I want us to see the waiting. The waiting. If you have an NIV or a newer translation, perhaps the word wait doesn't even appear there. In its place is the word hope. But in the King James Version, it says wait. Those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. Those that wait on the Lord. In Hebrew, the words hope and wait are synonymous, especially in this particular context. If you're hoping for something, it implies that you're waiting. And if you're waiting for something, it implies that you're hoping that it's going to come to pass. So these two words are synonymous. But both words, hoping and waiting, are looking forward to the promise of strength that God had just announced. Waiting. Waiting is not a passive activity. Waiting doesn't mean doing nothing, just the opposite. Waiting is an active verb. It refers to eagerly anticipating something. It refers to enduring with patience until something happens. It implies trusting God to do what He said He would do. And in this instance, we trust God to give the strength that He has promised. There are a few other verses in the Old Testament that use the term wait that I wanted to share with you. Psalm 62:1. Truly my soul waits on God. Psalm 62:5. My soul wait on God. Lamentations 3:25 and 26. The Lord is good to those who wait for Him. It is good that a man should both hope and quietly wait for the salvation of the Lord. And then Micah chapter 7, verse 7. Therefore I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. First, there is the weakness, the admitting that we need God's strength, the confession that we can't go on in ourselves. Then there is the waiting, the patient waiting. Waiting not in a sense that we don't think God is going to do it, but rather hopefully waiting, looking forward to the time when God will, in reality, provide the strength that He has promised. Weakness, waiting. Third, I want us to see the strength. The strength. In this passage, we see in verse 31 this phrase, those who hope or wait in the Lord. This reveals to us the source of the strength. The source of the strength is the Lord. He's the one we're waiting on. He's the one that will provide the strength that He has promised for, the Lord. I mentioned this before. I can't remember if it was on a Wednesday night or a Sunday morning. There are specifically 3 Hebrew words used in the Old Testament for God. Adonai, Elohim, and Yahweh. Yahweh. This is the word Yahweh. It's considered God's proper name. Now, I guess our proper name might be our first name. Whenever I am asked to sign some sort of legal form, they say, well, you know, there's a place for your first name and then maybe a middle initial and then a last name. They're not concerned about my middle name, but that's the name I go by. I don't go by my first name. I don't particularly like it, and so I'm not going to tell you what my first name is. But that's my legal name. That's my legal name. I have another name, my middle name, Cleve. But my legal name is Emery. Yahweh is God's legal name. In a sense, it's His proper name. It's considered the holiest of the 3. Why? Because if you look in a Hebrew Bible, it appears as only 4 consonants, no vowels. Y-H-W-H, Yahweh. Y-H-W-H, Yahweh. No vowels. Why no vowels? Because it was too holy to utter aloud. And so not even a priest would be permitted to speak out loud the name Yahweh. Do you know today we're only guessing how it's pronounced? No one knows for sure. We added those vowels hundreds and hundreds of years after they were written in the Old Testament. So we're not even sure we're saying that name correctly. And again, there is a reason. It's His holiest name. Yahweh is the one who will provide this strength that He has promised. So that's the source. Second, I want us to look at strength again. 2 words are used here at this point. One, strength, and the other, renew. Strength and renew. Verse 31, He will renew their strength. The word strength has several different connotations. They, in essence, are saying the same thing. It means firm, or force, or power, or ability, or might. All of those, all of the above. The word renew is an interesting one. It actually is a word picture. It is a picture of someone taking off their old clothes and putting on new clothes. And in this context then, it is a picture of our shedding our weakness and clothing ourselves with God's strength. Interesting word. Interesting words. So there is the source of this strength. There is the definition of this strength and also the concept of renew. And then lastly, I want us to see its sequence. Its sequence. It is indeed an interesting sequence, is it not? The verse says they will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary, and they will walk and not faint. What in the world is that all about? I think what it is saying is it is a picture of how Israel will return following their 70-year captivity. Some, because they are young and energetic, will be able to soar the way back. And by the way, it was 700 miles from Babylon to Israel. They will be able to figuratively, obviously, figuratively, they will be so excited that they will be able to soar back to Israel. Others, not quite as energetic, maybe not quite as young, they will run. They will run from Babylon to Israel. The rest of us, including me, we're going to walk. We're going to walk. And that's what they did too. So it is a picture of how they will return. It is a sequence. It is a progression. It might be something like this that I ran across. If you can fly, fly. If you can't fly any longer, run. If you can't run any longer, walk. And if you can't walk any longer, walk on. Walk on. I thought of the riddle that appears in one of Sophocles' Greek plays. It's addressed to Oedipus Rex. You've heard it, and you know the answer. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, 3 legs in the evening, and no legs at night? Man. It is a picture of the progression of man throughout his lifetime. As babies, we crawl on our all fours. As adults, upright on 2 legs. As we grow older, we might need a 3rd leg, a support. And then, in the end of life, we may not be able to walk at all. And that indeed is unfortunate. Strength. Do you need any strength to survive? Do you need any strength to see you through the coronavirus and everything else that we're being bombarded with these days? Well, God offers us a promise of His strength. I want to close with one of my favorite verses, Psalms 27:14. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and He will strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Let's pray. Father, we may be feeling weak here today. If not physically, perhaps in other ways. Maybe even spiritually to some degree. We may be wondering how long this is going to last, when it's going to be over. Perhaps we've even asked you to step in, and for whatever reason, you've chosen that the time is not right. We may be weak in other ways, perhaps financially, maybe emotionally. God, there are many ways that our lives can be drained by going through what we have unfortunately been through these last 6 months. God, we thank you for this wonderful promise of your strength. We may not have the strength to endure and to go on, but you, through the gift of your strength, can empower us to patiently endure and to expectantly look for the answer that surely someday is coming. In the meantime, God, please teach us to wait, expectantly, in faith, energetically, with certainty, knowing that you're going to respond to our weakness with your strength. For that we say thank you very, very much. For those of you online, let me again call your attention to the information that you can get on our website, fbcnoble.org, fbcnoble.org. Prayer requests are there, announcements are there. There's a way that you can leave a prayer request, and if you'd like for someone to contact you, there's a place for you to do that as well. So a lot of information there. You people have been so faithful to tune in and also to pray for our church and financially support the work of your church. And we just want to say thank you so very much. Have a great rest of the evening. Hope to see you Sunday morning at 11. God bless you. Good night.